Well, let's turn to our top story. Unprecedented protests against COVID restrictions, which have spread to some of China's biggest cities. The country has some of the toughest anti-COVID measures in the world, with tens of millions of people living under some kind of lockdown. Local authorities must impose strict rules, even if only a handful of COVID cases are found. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, explains.
China's population is trapped in the midst of an unwinnable war. Zero COVID has kept cases and deaths very low so far, but at relentless cost to personal freedoms and livelihoods. Zero COVID means zero tolerance of any coronavirus infections. That looks increasingly unsustainable in the face of the highly contagious Omicron variant. China has relied almost entirely on its own vaccines. They are reasonably effective. A study in Hong Kong found that 2 doses of the Chinese CoronaVac vaccine gave 70% protection against severe illness or death. But that compares to 90% protection from the US-German vaccine of Pfizer-BioNTech. A key problem is China's low vaccination levels among older people. Just over half of the over 60s have had 3 doses of vaccine. Among the over 80s, that falls to just 20%. Now, that low uptake seems partly down to a suspicion of modern medicine among many older Chinese people. Now, compare that with the UK, where 80% of the over 80s have recently had their autumn booster with an updated Omicron-specific vaccine, and most of them will have had 5 jabs. Early on in the pandemic, China built several COVID hospitals in a matter of days. But nearly 3 years since coronavirus emerged, its vast population now has almost no natural immunity against it.
They can't keep the virus out forever. It's a slippery eel, this virus. It's evolving and changing, and it's getting more infectious and harder to control with lockdowns and segregation in the way that it has been in the past. I think the way out for China is to get highly effective vaccines against the current variants into the elderly population as fast as they possibly can.
Modelling suggests ending zero COVID without more vaccination would allow Omicron to tear through the population, overwhelming intensive care units, causing an estimated 1.5 million deaths. While most of the world has returned to pre-COVID normality, China has yet to show it has an exit plan from the pandemic. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, joining me is Kerry Allen, the BBC's China media analyst. Great to have you with us, Kerry. So interesting to hear that report there from Fergus. How much is COVID at the front of people's minds as they talk about, I suppose, the protests online and also kind of pushing back against President Xi?
It is very much at the forefront of people's minds, and it has been for the last 3 years. There has been so much state media coverage over this period of time, very much telling people this is a deadly virus and you must do everything you can to protect against it. But yeah, these protests are happening now, and they're happening in so many different cities in China. And I've been seeing in recent months, people are just extremely burnt out with the fact that China hasn't changed its zero COVID policy, that things have stayed very much the same. So people, I've been feeling this frustration online on platforms like Sina Weibo. You've seen people just saying the words 3 years we've been through this. And now these protests are taking place, and you can feel that people are, they're not feeling alone in all this. They're feeling more and more frustrated than ever.
Is it possible to tell, Kerry, what or how people feel about the protests? What are you seeing?
It absolutely is. I mean, the fact that we've seen footage appearing on platforms like Twitter in various different Chinese cities, and we verify, we look at where these have occurred, and we recognise that they're all basically saying, we're done with this. But yeah, I mean, social media platforms like Sina Weibo, they try to suppress these. So what happens is you'll get Chinese social media users who will use a piece of software known as a VPN in order to access platforms like Twitter and Facebook and to post there instead. Also, what we're seeing at the moment is cryptic ways that people get their message out, because they understand that, for example, the word Shanghai, where one of the major protests took place, that's become a censored search term. So what people have been doing instead is they've been using the expression a white piece of paper, because a lot of people who've been protesting in Shanghai and other cities, they've just taken a white piece of paper and held it to show that they're silenced, that these are, they can't say any words. And so people have been doing that. The censors have been clamping down on that. So then they're using new ways like A4. They're talking about A4 pieces of paper, A3 pieces of paper. They keep trying to find new ways to avoid censorship and getting their message out.
And with that, Kerry, I'm also wondering, thinking of Fergus's report there as well, I mean, are people talking about those low rates of vaccinations and the precarious healthcare position that there appears to be, particularly when it comes to hospital capacity, if in fact there was an outbreak of COVID?
Well, the government has been very much emphasising this message in state media reports over the last month, saying that elderly people in particular must get vaccinated. But, I mean, if we go to this time last year, it was very much the case that the government media was putting out messages saying that people had had their first and second jab, and the rate then was about 80%. So we're talking about boosters now, and whether people have had their third or even their fourth vaccine. So this is a message that keeps on being put out. But people feel that they did everything that they were asked early on. They feel like they've got vaccinated, and they wonder how long will this continue? Will they just keep on being vaccinated and still caught in this situation where zero COVID lockdowns can still happen?
Kerry, thank you so much. Always so interesting to get your thoughts on these stories.